Let's imagine ourselves stepping into an 18th century ballroom, where candlelight flickers softly, silk gowns rustle, and the air is filled with the scent of perfume and powder. As you look around the crowd, you'd see noblemen and aristocrats wearing huge sparkling gemstones around their necks and in their ears. If you saw this scene today, you'd be sure you were looking at the world's most expensive, priceless diamonds. But the truth is, in most cases, they weren't diamonds at all. The wealthiest people of the era, including members of the royal families themselves and Marie Antoinette, wore something entirely different. Something called paste. When we hear that word today, most people think of some kind of glue, paste, or cheap plastic costume jewellery. But in the 18th century, during the Georgian era, paste represented the highest level of luxury, brilliant craftsmanship, and aristocratic status. But what exactly was this material, and why modern collectors pay thousands of dollars for them at auctions? To understand this, we need to clear up the biggest misconception. Georgian-era paste jewellery was not made from simple window glass. This material was an extremely heavy, special type of flint glass, also known as lead crystal. Its secret lay in the fact that during melting, an incredibly high amount of lead oxide, often reaching 40%, was mixed into the mass. The presence of lead completely changed the physical and optical properties of the glass. When candlelight entered these stones, it didn't just pass through them. It dramatically refracted and broke into brilliant rainbow colors. This internal, fiery sparkle, or dispersion of color, is what gemologists call the stone's dispersion or fire. This lead glass had such an amazing optical play that in the flickering twilight, it was almost impossible to distinguish from a real diamond. But the magic didn't end with the raw material. In fact, the real craftsmanship began afterward. Cheap glass jewellery of the era was pressed into simple molds in its liquid state, which left its edges dull and lifeless. In the case of paste, however, the raw, cooled glass blocks were taken by real gemstone cutters. They treated them exactly like the most valuable diamonds. Every tiny surface, every single facet, was hand-cut and polished to a razor-sharp edge. If you pick up one of these antique pieces, you'll immediately feel the difference. These are surprisingly heavy, substantial pieces, with a density almost identical to that of real gemstones. If we look closely at these pieces, we can discover their most exciting secret. This detail is what still fascinates the world of antiques today. If you look into the center of such a stone, you'll see a tiny, distinct black dot at its very bottom point. This black dot is one of the most brilliant optical illusions in the world. In the 18th century, real diamonds were not yet cut into the modern, laser-precise, brilliant shape we see today. Back then, they used what was called the old mine cut or rose cut. With these older types of diamonds, the very bottom point of the stone did not end in a sharp tip. Instead, the cutters cut it flat. This flat bottom part is called a culet. When you looked at such a real diamond from above, due to the stone's internal light refraction and the lack of light, this flat bottom part appeared as a dark, black dot. The makers of paste jewellery knew that if they wanted to create a perfect illusion, they had to imitate this effect. So, they took a fine brush and placed a single tiny black dot of paint or enamel on the flattened bottom tip of the glass stone before setting it. When the stone was in place, this black dot did something amazing. It visually added depth to the glass. It drew the eye deeper into the center of the stone, making it appear not like a flat piece of glass, but like an infinitely deep, three-dimensional gemstone. That's why these premium pieces are still called black dot paste jewellery today. But how did this paint dot stay? And how were the stones secured if no glue was used? This is where the amazing metalwork of Georgian-era jewellers comes in. These stones were never left open from below. A A completely closed, delicate metal cup was created for them, which we call a closed-back setting. This metal cup prevented the wearer's skin or dark clothing from dulling the jewel's sparkle. But the biggest trick was foiling. Before the glass was placed into the metal cup, a hair-thin concave foil made of silver, copper, or gold was smoothed onto its bottom. This foil practically acted as a tiny mirror beneath the stone, capturing the candlelight, amplifying it, and reflecting it back toward the viewer. Sometimes these foils were painted in different colours by the masters, allowing them to conjure up emeralds, rubies, or amethysts from the same colourless lead glass. When the stone was placed on the foil, the jeweller, with micrometric precision, used a tiny tool to crimp the rim of the metal cup around the edge of the glass. This mechanical pressure, or bezel crimping, held the stone in place, completely glue-free and ideally hermetically sealing the interior. If we examine the materials of these jewels, we can notice something very peculiar, which is also a hallmark of the era. We can talk about a kind of metal sandwich. The stones were almost without exception set in silver because it was realized that yellow gold would give a yellowish tone to the glass, while the cool, clear shine of silver would highlight the whiteness of the diamond. But silver has a bad quality. When it touches the skin, it quickly oxidizes and turns black, which would stain the noble lady's skin or their expensive silk dresses. That's why a low-carat gold plate was soldered onto the back of the jewellery, which directly touched the body. If a piece of jewellery is silver in front and gold in back, that's one of the surest identifiers of the era. Many people look for hallmarks on these pieces, and if they don't find any, they think they have a fake. But the reality is quite the opposite. In the 18th century, precious metal regulations did exist, but they didn't apply to jewellery as a requirement, only to larger utility items like silver bowls or pitchers. Jewellers deliberately avoided assay offices so they wouldn't have to pay taxes. Moreover, the technology didn't allow for marking. These settings were made of such thin, hand-hammered sheets that the force of a heavy hallmarking punch would have immediately shattered the glass and the foil. Therefore, the lack of a hallmark on Georgian-era pieces is completely natural. When an expert checks for authenticity today, they look for entirely different things. They place the stone under a microscope and observe the inclusions. Since paste is glass, tiny, perfectly spherical gas bubbles were inevitably trapped in the material during melting. Real diamonds never have such round bubbles. If the bubbles were close to the surface, centuries of wear would have abraded their surface, leaving tiny, crater-like pits on the glass. They also examined the pins of brooches, which in the Georgian era were unusually long, extending far beyond the body of the jewel, to pass through the thick, heavy fabrics of the time. But why are these pieces worth thousands today if they are made of glass? The answer lies in time, rarity, and incredible fragility. The biggest enemy of Georgian-era paste jewellery is water. Because their backs are closed and foiled, if such a piece of jewellery is submerged in water or placed in an ultrasonic cleaner, water seeps under the stone due to capillary action. The internal metal foil immediately begins to oxidize, turning black and rusting. When this happens, the stone permanently loses its sparkle and, in collectors' terms, dies. Because of this, most of these jewels have been destroyed or damaged over the past 200 years. The number of survivors in perfect condition is negligible, and collectors fight real battles for them, especially for Rivière necklaces, which consist of continuous, gradually increasing stones, or for complete jewellery sets, called parures, preserved in their original boxes, whose value can easily exceed $25,000. If someone invests in such a piece, they need to know that patina is valuable here. The deep, grey, dark antique silver should never be polished shiny, because that would lose the soul of the jewellery and a large part of its market value. With Georgian-era paste jewellery, we're not paying for the weight of the precious metal or the gemstone. Here, we are buying the brilliance of a bygone era, the irreplaceable work of human hands, and the forgotten romance of candlelight balls, which has forever inscribed itself among the greatest masterpieces of jewellery history. Thank you for joining me on this fascinating journey through time into the world of 18th century luxury and mysterious black dots. If you too were captivated by the brilliance of Georgian-era masters, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on other rare jewellery history pieces. See you in the next video, and until then, let's discover the forgotten treasures of the past together.